Good morning. My name is Russell Brunner. I'm the land manager here at the Byron Forest Preserve District. This morning we are out at our Stephen and Deirdre Nardi Equine Prairie Preserve, located just off of River Road, south of Byron, adjacent to the Byron Dragway that's right next to us. This site was protected in 2003 primarily, with a couple additions since. It's now at 550 acres. It is our largest property, and it's primarily restorations from former ag ground. We're standing right now in what we call the White Farm portion, which was a 200-acre sand farm that we acquired that was mostly in row crop with some grazing going on. So we've done a lot of prairie restorations on this site. That's a lot of the plants we'll look at this morning is in these restorations. The site does also have some pretty nice quality upper kind of hillside gravel prairie remnants with some other species in the back of the property to the south back here too. Alright, so a plant we're looking at right now is wild lupin. So again, this is in a restoration. Lupin is a really nice late spring, early summer wildflower. Loves sandy soil. That's really where it's found in its native remnant habitats. This is not remnant here, but it's known from the Rock River Valley on sand prairies. More common as you go north up into Wisconsin. This wild lupin is a legume, so the flowers are sort of pea-like. You see the kind of light purple lavender colors. They were probably at peak bloom a week ago. So now we still have blooms on a lot of the plants, but there's also seed pods forming. They love the sandy soil here at this Nardi property in the front, which is all sand. There are thousands of these lupin out here in the spring. And they really flourish after we do prescribed burns. So we burn about half of this prairie every year, and we are going to be looking at plants in the burned unit this morning. This wildflower is Ohio Spiderwort, another nice native prairie wildflower that comes up really easily in restorations for us, but it also can be found on pretty high quality prairie remnants. You want to catch it in the morning, as I guess each bloom just blooms for one day, but the clusters on top can have maybe 20, 30 blooms, so the plant will flower for a few weeks. But each individual bloom is just a day flower. So it basically is open in the morning, and if you come out here and hike in the afternoon or evening, they're all going to be closed up for the day, and that's all for that bloom. You kind of have a sticky sap if you break a stem off. 3 petals, yellow stamens in the center, a really nice native wildflower in these sand prairies. Right, this is called sand Coreopsis or landsleeve Coreopsis. It's another native sand-loving perennial. We were just talking about this plant came up really abundantly when these restorations were brand new, but actually over the years with more competition it has really thinned out, and now it's actually pretty unusual to find in the prairies out here. But it's in the aster family. It's nice yellow petals. A nice early summer bloom in the sand prairies. This is wild quinine, another native perennial. I always feel like early on these tight clusters of buds that are coming up, the plant's not quite in flower yet, look like kind of cauliflower heads on these plants. Really neat structure, get to be about 3-4 feet tall. They end up with maybe 50 to 75 little small white flowers on top here in the next couple of weeks, probably be in full bloom in the middle of June. This is white wild indigo, Baptisia alba. It's a legume also, so in the pea family, so these blossoms that are just starting to open, especially on the lower end of the flowering stalk, kind of have a typical pea flower look. White, but you see it's just starting to open. These are pretty nice and showy. 3-4 foot tall, kind of look like little shrubs in the prairie. They're a herbaceous perennial. So they start over from the ground every year also. A neat thing later on is the flowers turn into these kind of black seed pods, kind of big seeds inside. But in the fall, the whole stems can break off and kind of blow around across the prairies, and sometimes you'll find a fence line that just has hundreds of them piled up against it. So they're kind of like our tumbleweed. We're looking at this plant, still kind of emerging, growing this year. This is lead plant, Amorphokinescens. Really nice, considered pretty high quality perennial, again in the legume family. Not going to be blooming until closer to July, but herbaceous, perennial, big roots, they say, can go down 10 or 15 feet in some soils. If it doesn't get burned for a few years, it actually becomes a woody shrub in the prairie. But if it gets burned, it just comes up like a typical wildflower. It's going to have really tiny little purple flowers later in the year. Then we can look at a few other plants if we just scan through. This little grass that's coming up all in the sand prairie is a early season grass called June grass. Loves the sand. It's a nice part of the mix in a sand prairie. The leaves right here, again, we're early, but prairie cinquefoil. It's going to get to be just maybe 2 feet tall, 2 or 3 feet tall. Little white flowers in the middle of summer. A few other leaves we can look at. We have white and purple prairie clover in this planting. This is a white prairie clover that's coming up. Will be blooming again closer to July 1st, so that's going to have small white clover flowers on top. Next to that is just a small cluster. Maybe we'll see a bigger one later. Coreopsis palmata, so the prairie coreopsis, coming up really well in restorations. Tend to find it on almost all high quality prairie remnants in this area. And then we're getting closer to bloom with one of the iconic flowers for sure of our hill prairies in this area. That's Echinacea pallida, pale purple coneflower. Just getting really close to bloom. Usually those are in full bloom by middle of June. Again, these petals are starting to form a little more. They kind of erupt towards the sky at first, and then as they get larger, they all bend over and they droop or hang down on the sides. Again, it's one of my favorite prairie flowers out here. Finding all the good remnants. Ends up with a black seed head later on. It's easy to collect. It comes up pretty well in restorations. It loves fire, so responds very well to prescribed burning. Most of the blooms are in the burned units. It doesn't flower nearly as often in the unburned units. So pale purple coneflower. Now we're looking at a penstemon species. This one is difficult to ID for me, but it's either pale beard tongue or Penstemon hirsutus, which I think is called hairy beard tongue, but they're very similar in size. Late spring blooms here. Really nice kind of white lavender flowers. There's also a third species out here called Penstemon digitalis that's a little bit taller and is going to be blooming in the next couple of weeks. These smaller penstemon are also characteristic of the prairie remnants out here on the upland rocky dolomite prairies. All right, this plant coming up is round-headed bush clover, Lespedeza. I think it's Lespedeza capitata. Pretty common in plantings. It also hangs on well in a lot of remnants and degraded remnants. We were just talking about, you can probably find this at almost all prairie preserves in our area. But then a much more rare relative is this plant right here. This is called prairie bush clover, Lespedeza leptostachya, last I knew. And this is an endangered species, federally, I believe, and is super rare in Illinois. And another plant, while we're right here looking, is this plant right here called wood betony, partially parasitic plant. The roots tie into some of the grasses and maybe other plants in the area and draw some nutrients and water from them. Really nice prairie plant. You can find that in remnant sand and dolomite prairies in this area. All right, so another thing with this wood betony is being partially parasitic. It feeds on these grasses and actually keeps the grass height quite a bit shorter, almost like it's being grazed or suppressed somehow. So in a lot of preserves where there's no grazing going on, some of us are hoping that this wood betony is going to help kind of keep the grass dominance in check and help keep some more space for other wildflowers in these areas. Another plant here, I don't know if we'll go find it, but is this plant called false or bastard toadflax, Commandra. And it's a species that no one is having any luck growing from seed. But what we're figuring out you can do is it's a big clonal plant. You can actually transplant a portion of it and it will take off growing on its own. So we're also trying that in some of these restorations. We now have a spot that has about a 15-foot ring of the Commandra growing in a restoration where it's a species that's either difficult or impossible to grow from seed. So that's another way we can introduce some rare species into our prairie plantings. All right, this little plant growing on a upland dry rocky dolomite hill prairie is called Downy yellow painted cup. It's a Castelligia species. I think it's Castelligia sessiliflora. That's pretty much in full bloom there, kind of yellow tubular flowers. And really nice, again, indicator typically of a remnant, although I know of a few places and people that have gotten them to grow from seed too and have them in restorations. But a rare plant in Illinois, I think it might be maybe a threatened species statewide. And if you're in a nice quality prairie remnant in northern Illinois, you might find a few of these plants there. All right, so at the Nardi Preserve, there are about 10 miles of maintained trails. They also serve as definitely management trails for us and fire breaks. So we do a lot of burning. We burn probably about half of this preserve every year, and mowed trails make excellent fire breaks to do prescribed burning very safely, and it's an essential thing. Okay, so now we're at the south back end of the Nardi Preserve out here. We are on some original remnant prairie, and we're on an area called Rorson's Hill, named for a Mr. Rorson who was a longtime friend of Mr. Stephen Nardi. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about Mr. Nardi donated 293 acres to the Forest Preserve District in 2003. He developed a good relationship with my boss, our director, Todd Tucker, out here. And after many years, he decided to donate his entire 293 acres to the district, just keeping his little farmette, wanting it to remain public and open for all time. And in doing so, the district was able to get a grant to acquire the White Farm, where we were at earlier, looking at all the flowers in the burned unit. That was about 200 acres. And since then, we've added a few more portions to get it up to that 550 acres. So Mr. Nardi loved this land. So a couple other things about this preserve: it's open to horse riding. And that partly was that Mr. Nardi bought this land to ride horses, and he was a horse rider. He had friends come out, they would go on rides out here. They had trails all over. A lot of our trails are just where their old trails were at. So part of his donation was that this would be open to horse riding. Kind of in addition to that, there are no dogs allowed on this site as potential conflicts with the horses, and it's also another great bird site. We have a lot of grassland birds out here. We're hearing dick sissels all over, meadowlarks and so forth out here. Northern harriers, another really nice species that is out here, and we think is probably nesting out here. But right here, we're kind of in the memorial spot. Mr. Nardi passed away a couple of years ago. He just has a memorial bench on Rorson's Hill with a great view here, and some of his words are on a plaque here that we will show you also.